But, we are learning more and more about various tools and techniques. I mean, these days, there is so much research on the whole idea of psychedelics.
Right.
I think a lot of psychology, mental health professionals starting to use. I know there are a lot of studies in clinical trials. What is your overall take, and are you overall excited about the potential of psychedelics in treatment of mental health issues?
I'm very excited. I'm very excited because it is the first time in the history of psychiatry that when psilocybin, which is extracted from mushrooms, it's already in clinical trials for the treatment of depression, anxiety, and PTSD. But it's the first time that the drug has to be prescribed along with therapy. The trial is not even constructed without therapy.
Right.
And to me, that is what I've been saying for the longest time, this integration I was talking about. The kind of therapy you do has a big impact on whether psilocybin or psychedelics will help you or not. So this is where the brain, mind, identity all come together. And by the way, the reason I'm very excited, particularly about this class of medicine, is because my therapy, integral self-therapy, and the whole East-West thing I was talking about is about transcendence, is about dissolving, is about feeling oneness and contextualizing the oneness experience with your life, which is what these medicines are designed to give you a shortcut into. And
so what are some of the more promising psychedelics that are being investigated?
So psilocybin is probably, in my view, the most promising of all of these. There's LSD, of course. There's MDMA, which has recently been approved in Australia for the treatment of post-traumatic stress disorder. And then there's DMT and the other hallucinogens. But
the DMT is supposed to be extremely powerful, right?
DMT is very powerful, but keep in mind that psilocybin is a derivative of DMT. So what we call psilocybin is a pre-drug which gets converted in the body to something called psilocin, which is basically 4-hydroxy-DMT. So it's a DMT that which is basically a derivative of something we call tryptamine. So anyway, so you have all of these compounds, which, by the way, as you know, historically in the 60s, there was a lot of interest in psychedelics. Hoffman, who from Sandoz came up with LSD. He then extracted psilocybin, and there were literally 500 to 1,000 papers about how effective these are. And then because of politics and stigmatization, for the last 40 years, it's gone until it's made a resurgence.
And are you seeing signs of this happening in India as well? Are people looking into this? Are there any, any trials happening in India?
There are no trials, as far as I know, happening in India. I have for years had patients who have lived across the world who on their own have done psilocybin in the interval prior to my session or taken other hallucinogens. So I've had the opportunity to observe its interaction with therapy. And I can tell you, I use meditation to create transcendence. And the whole point of my therapy is how do you create transcendence, give you the experience of oneness to help you experience the fact that you are not locked into this identity. Okay. Now, when I started doing this therapy, and a few of my patients who were living abroad went to a shamanic tea ceremony, took psilocybin, and then came for therapy. And I can tell you, Mukesh, one session achieved as much as maybe 20 or 30 sessions. The kind of insight they got, because as I said, it's not about ideas. The penny has to drop. You have to feel something. You have to have an epiphany in therapy. You have to have what we call like an aha moment. That was happening more predictably and easier with psilocybin and other compounds. And we know from the neurochemistry that it does interesting things to the brain that perhaps changes the ways in which the brain works, different parts of the brain work together.
So is there any hope in this decade some of these psychedelics become prescription drugs that, you can perhaps recommend?
Absolutely. I think psilocybin is probably going to be on the formulary in the US very soon, and hopefully then globally it will be available. My only, I would say, what shall I say? I just feel not so good about the fact that Western medicine, again, by the virtue of science, has to take an extract from a plant and study only psilocybin as opposed to the whole mushroom. Because we know as we look at these plants, they're different alkaloids, they're different compounds that have a synergistic effect. Some inhibit certain effects, some amplify certain effects, but Western science can't do it because you need a randomized trial, you see. So my fear is that we may not see the same kind of efficacy that we might have seen with the whole plant as we will with psilocybin, but let's wait and see. But yeah, I'm very excited about this whole new, it's not new, but let's say the resurgence in the of this, because to me, it is finally we're bringing together what was called spirituality and psychiatry and psychology together as it always should have been.
And in some ways, it's again not very new, because in most traditional cultures, people have been using different kind of plants to induce certain mental state for curing various kind of things and so on, right? So it's probably finally we are able to figure out how it works. But people probably have known in various cultures, at least, a lot of benefits will derive from these.
Absolutely. All ancient cultures have used either plants, herbs, substances, or techniques to cause the dissolving of the individual self. When I've been in America, I went to a Native American sweat lodge. Very similar. You had a transcendent experience, just as you might when I was in the foothills of the Himalayas meditating, so.
What do you think about some of those techniques, which are emerging, which are using this external stimulation brain for achieving some of these?
Very promising and shows great results in specific indications, and we are evolving in being more and more targeted in terms of where we deliver that stimulation.
Yeah.
So repetitive transcranial magnetic stimulation uses a magnetic coil, and you have magnetic basically pulses of different frequencies that cause activation of certain brain areas, and it's actually very useful. Again, in America, it's underused because, in my view, because of cost and various other things. I definitely think these are things that we use in our practice. More and more psychiatrists are using it, and definitely has a lot of promise. Absolutely.
And are there other tools that which are just new emerging tools that you are tracking or you are excited about?
Fascinating. One is, of course, we talked about psychedelics, and then with brain stimulation, transcranial magnetic stimulation is getting more targeted and more getting into deep brain structures more.
Mm-hmm.
I'm also very interested in certain techniques where we can notice what's happening in terms of brain activation and modulate it. For example, there's a very interesting device that amplifies slow wave sleep by monitoring when you're getting into that slow wave sleep and then giving an auditory stimulus that increases that slow wave stimulus.
Right.
So you see, we once we understand the physiology, we can start playing around with that to increase various capacities of the brain.